Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Between the Covers. My name is Bradley Shaw, and this evening I'm talking to Phil Boas, the author of the Mind Traveller series. Good evening, Phil. How are you?
Good evening, Bradley. I'm pretty good, I think.
That's good. Tell us more about the Mind Traveller. I mean, you've got book one coming out in May. So, yeah, tell us firstly book one. What's the Mind Traveller? What can we expect from that one?
Okay, well, the Mind Travellers is a series which began about 10 years ago when I initially retired from earning money and decided the thing to do was to switch occupations and become a writer. I'd spent nearly 50 years as a psychotherapist, working with groups and working with businesses and organisations. And I thought, if I thought about all the people I'd been some use to, it probably wouldn't have been more than a couple of thousand. I thought, how on earth, if you spend all this much time learning skills and helping people, how can you actually be more useful? So I decided that I'd written some textbooks and they didn't go very far. So I thought, time to write novels.
Wow.
So that was the start. I mean, I thought, okay, I'm retired. I'm now going to become a writer. Eventually I'll become an author, especially if I publish. And then maybe I can reach a whole lot more people about interesting and useful things.
Awesome. Well, that's great. So the decision to write was later in life, obviously, for you, like you retired. So that was your journey.
Well, yeah, I was in my early 70s.
Yep.
About 71, 72 when I started. That was 10 years ago.
Fantastic.
So at that point in time, I thought, okay, let's write a series which is really about something that it's not about.
Yep.
So science fiction.
Awesome. So tell us about it's what is it, Zed and Ophelia, or Zed and Ophelia? The Mind Travellers book one. Allegory, yeah, that's the word I was looking for. So tell us about that book, first book one.
Okay, book one is essentially about a spaceship crew who have been sent to evaluate a planet for basically to decide whether or not people can live there.
Yep.
There's already one other planet where humans have been transferred. There's 1 million humans on another planet, but now they've found a new one.
Okay.
So they send the crew to find out, is this place habitable? Not knowing that the people who actually inhabit the planet, should I do spoilers here?
Not too many, maybe one.
Okay.
Not a big one.
Well, the people who inhabit the planet have actually prevented themselves from being seen.
Okay.
So when the spaceship arrives, they don't know that the planet is inhabited. They think that it's not.
Okay. Very
And
interesting.
they are confronted with a telepathic and telekinetic society that has a set of values that I just love.
Okay, good.
So yeah, essentially it's about, so how do you play out a set of really interesting, good quality values in a story that will allow people to enjoy the story, but get a whole lot of other messages as well.
Yeah, fantastic. So you...
The whole time,
Sorry, I was going to say you've created the psychological profile as much engaged in the psychological of the experience as much as just the sci-fi science fiction of it. You've put the characters into the psychology of it.
Absolutely. And
yeah, I like it.
The values of the society that they meet are the values that I would like to see in the world around us.
Yeah.
So essentially now you've got a spaceship crew who come from planet Earth as we know it today and find themselves confronted with a society in no way like their own.
Definitely. Yeah, that would be a shock, I'm sure.
Well, yes, it is. Yeah. And then the question becomes, so how do you, trying not to do spoilers here, how do you find out about another society? How do you learn about them? How do you make contact with them? What are the options and what are the processes?
Yeah.
So the 5 books are in essence an attempt to not just answer that question, but to answer it in the midst of a really interesting adventure, primarily of its hero, who is the psychologist who is on board the spaceship that arrives over the planet.
Wow. Okay.
So that's what it's about.
Yeah. Wow. Well, I'm sure everyone will enjoy getting into that because it sounds very meaty. So with that, did you, as you said, you started writing 10 years ago. How did you, was the incubus for this story at that time, or did you always have it in your mind and you were playing with it long before? Because that sometimes can be a process of writing as well.
Well, 10 years ago, I had open heart surgery. And when I stopped, I'd had a whole lot of workshops I was supposed to be running, but I couldn't do anything for months. So I'm sitting at home, I'm reading all these books, and I'm thinking, there must be something more useful I can do when I'm sitting waiting to be able to get back to work.
Yeah.
And that's where it arose. It emerged out of that.
Okay, so you're just sitting in that limbo and
I was
developing.
staring at my library, saying, I've got to do more than just read bloody books while I'm waiting for the workshop to appear.
Good point. So was it difficult to start? I mean, did you study writing? Did you do some research into writing a book first, or did you just start writing?
Well, I'd written some textbooks and I thought, writing a novel, that's pretty straightforward. I'll just get into that.
Yeah.
Well, I did. I got into it, and I still kept working for a couple of years, earning some money. And then I stopped doing that, and I thought I'd get serious about this. So I took the first 5 chapters I'd written of this book to an editor who looked at it and just burst out laughing and said, "This isn't even a relative of a novel. This is your ramblings and your fantasy. You need to learn to write novels."
Yeah.
And I thought, oh, great, right? So then I went back to university and I did some study at Ballarat Uni.
Yeah.
In the writing course for a couple of years, and I did a whole lot of workshops with Victorian writers. And I thought, a year later, in the midst of this, I submitted the next rewrite of the 5 chapters to the person who was running one of the courses, and she looked at me after she'd read it and she said, "This is a good try, Phil, but it still doesn't even resemble a novel. You need to learn a whole lot." So that went on for about 3 years. I submitted it about 3 times, and the 4th year that I submitted it, I got a response that said, "Okay, you're beginning to actually look like you understand something about the possibility of writing a novel." Good. And
it's that skill set, isn't it? It is identifying the design of a novel is so different sometimes to aspects. And your story has so much character-driven elements, and also another planet. So of course, it has to be constructed in a way that's entertaining and fluid. So no, I agree. You've dedicated yourself to it and made the commitment to it, and that's honourable. So well done.
Oh, I like being honourable.
Hey?
I like being honourable. That's good. You can keep saying stuff like that.
No, but it is. Like a lot of people don't. They try to shortcut it. They think, I write it and I'll just post it online, or I've written it, I don't need an editor. So they have a bit of an arrogance and a bit of an ignorance about it. And it's not doing justice to a good story. And I think if you're disciplined and you're committed to your story, which you've shown by learning and by growing, you've developed a story that's readable and enjoyable as a professional standard, which is great. And you've taken that responsibility. So well done. So tell me, what other challenges did you have writing the book? I mean, how did you find writing your characters, creating your characters, designing them to fit into this parody you created of story? How did that happen? How did that work for you?
Well, I started off thinking what I needed to do with the characters was use the process I'd used as a therapist and write like I wrote case studies.
Yep.
And the first character I wrote was a terrific case study. And when I submitted it as the suggestion for the main character, the hero of the story, the editor who looked at it just laughed. And she said, "Look, if you're writing for a professional journalist, it'd be brilliant, but it doesn't have any resemblance to a novel, any more than the first stuff you started out did." That started
at least you got a sense of humour for it too, though. I mean, obviously, the feedback was constructive, but of course, you have to have a laugh. You are learning, you are developing a skill. So I'm glad.
So it took about 5 years.
It
took about 5 years before I got it. I began to understand first of all, about what a novel looked like, and secondly, about how you develop characters and how you develop a scenario that actually is realistic. Yeah. And I kept being told to read this and read that, and I must have read 20 or 30 books in the course of that period of time. Some of which helped and some of which did not help.
Yeah, yeah. No, it's good. Your patience and your persistence. Well done.
Well, I mean, by the time I'd read about 10 or 15 novels that was supposed to show me what a science fiction work ought to be like, I realized that I was either utterly incompetent or completely hopeless, and there was no chance I'd ever write anything that looked like that.
Yeah.
And at that point in time, I was lucky I found someone who gave me advice about what to do, which eventually was stop trying to write like other people and just settle down and write whatever it is a way you can write that makes sense to you, given what you want to say and the messages you want to put in. I did.
And that's the struggle. That's the struggle a lot of writers find, especially new writers, their voice, having their identity and their narrative and their expression that's unique to them, but also then having the editor or having the support that creates and crafts more of the technical side of the novel, which if you can write fluidly and write the expression you want, then having the technical side is certainly later on an asset. But don't think about that first. Think about the story and get it out. I agree. So did you do a lot of research into planetary excavations and other options, like
Yes.
What do they call it? Terraforming, isn't it? Terraforming?
Well, no, I didn't know. I wasn't. No, I didn't go there. Okay. That's serious technical stuff.
Yeah.
I decided that.
I was thinking, how serious is it?
Well, intelligence suggested to me that I should avoid technical issues that I really didn't understand.
Yeah, you didn't want to do the Tom Clancy version of taking over another planet, or
where
he would put all the specifics of the spaceship in. 20 pages just on the bridge of the spaceship. But so tell us about it too. Like with your writing, as you crafted it, did you begin to develop that style in allocating time to it? So you set up a structure, almost like you said, like almost like a job. Through the process of learning, of course, you've taken that time. But once you got into it and you got the serious discipline, did you find yourself able to craft your routine? And tell us about your routine for writing.
Well, I read a lot about people who had writing routines and who were providing advice and suggestions about how I should do it. And I variously tried writing a certain number of words a day, or writing a certain number of words a week, or writing a certain number of pages. After a little while, I realized this simply wasn't me. There was absolutely no hope in the world I was ever going to follow any set of instructions like that.
Yeah.
So at that point in time, I decided I had to just be me.
Yep, just write your own.
Yeah, so I would get up in the middle of the night some nights and write until 4 or 5 in the morning, because that felt like what I wanted to do, and then I'd sleep half the day.
Yeah, so, a lot of people say that writing at night is stronger, is clearer.
Well, you've got no interferences and no outside noises, and no one rings you or talks to you on the computer or does anything, actually.
That's right.
So my time was, I guess, during the period of time I wrote the books, I would think probably I would have spent about a third of the time writing in the wee hours of the night.
Yeah.
And the rest during the day I'd just choose times to write and whenever I felt like it, which would be almost every day.
So you started with the first book, obviously, and that was when you were running around 5 years asking people for advice, support, learning the craft of writing the first novel. When did you decide, or when did you realize you were actually it was going to become a series? I think it's 5 books, isn't it, at the moment?
5 books. I've written 5.
Yeah. So when did you realize that was going to become when it was going to become a series, of like an omnibus of such books?
Well, I just decided on the number 5 right at the beginning. Cool. That was that was when I didn't know that I didn't know how to write a novel. When I found out that I didn't know how to write a novel, I thought, I'm not going to change the number I've got in my head. So there's going to be 5 books in this series, but it's going to take me a while before I get it.
Just a different approach to the idea. Yeah, I see.
Yeah.
So, now, normally I ask the question too of authors like yourself, who you are a new author really over the last 10 years, having learned and developed, and of course, now evolved into being published, and of course, having a next phase of success. So I ask this a lot of new authors as well, of after what you've learned, What advice would you give to up and coming or other new writers? If you were to share your advice.
I think my first response to that would be, I wouldn't have the nerve to provide advice to someone who was going to write a book. But if someone asked me, what should I do? I think what I'd tell them is learn to write, like read and learn to write.
Yeah.
I mean, it just takes time. I thought I knew how to do it because, when you write textbooks, you think, okay, you're talking of a subject you know something about. And, I wrote a book in 3 months and it was a good textbook, did fine, except that I didn't know that that's not what a novel was about.
That's right.
And that wasn't because I hadn't read hundreds of novels. It was because I never thought about writing a novel as opposed to writing a textbook, not the same animal at all.
No, and the conscientious, as you say, being conscious of reading a novel to writing a novel is two different aspects. Because your parody is different in reading to writing.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
absolutely. So, I mean, when I started out, I thought, eventually people will tell me what I need to know. And then I found that actually I had to find out what it was I needed to know. Other people's experience. Stephen King was the place. Everyone throws you at Stephen King real early on. Read what he has to say. I thought if I had to write novels like Stephen King, I'd have to kill myself because it's too depressing. I mean, I'm a utopian and he's a dystopian.
Yes.
And his way of writing and his way of working and his whole life process is different to anything that would make sense to me.
Yeah.
So it took me a while to adapt. All these people who've written books on writing, I mean, they know how to write themselves. They're really good at writing. They've got to be asked to be writing about writers because they were already successful. And I thought, but they're not like me. I can't
write
do it
your way, and that's what most individuals do.
I figured I had to learn how to do it so it made sense, and I chose 5 books. It was just an arbitrary number. I thought 5 books, that's a good number to write. And once I'd done, the first one was actually finished and it looked like a book, and I sent it off to a manuscript. I sent it off to 2 manuscript assessors. The first one got back to me about, I don't think I've ever had anything less helpful. It came back to me from a very respectable source. And she basically said to me, look, you need to read these 6 books and go to these 6 workshops. And there's no point in you talking to me because this just isn't good enough. The 6 books she gave me to read, I had already read. The workshops she suggested I had already done. And I looked at this and I thought, this is not helpful.
No.
Then I got sent to another manuscript assessor, and they looked at it and said, just cut out the first 5 chapters and you've got a book. And the first 5 chapters had all the beaut stuff I'd done on the personality of all the characters, which no one was interested in until there was a story.
That's right. You got to get into it. You got to get the meat of it. That's right.
So once I'd learned to dispose of all the stuff that I really thought was wonderful and settle down for the stuff that was actually about the story, I think I first got a grip, about 5 years ago, I finally got a grip on what I had to be thinking about.
And it's good, like I said, that you've identified that and you've learnt that craft. So would you also, I guess, if you were looking at yourself now, going back maybe 30 years even when you started writing, say if you were going to write, what would you tell yourself as you were going to write 30 years ago before you ventured into this campaign? What advice would you give yourself again?
I don't have a sensible answer to that question.
Well, it's a hypothetical. I mean, naturally, it's not going to happen.
Well, I mean, looking back, I mean, if I was trying to give myself advice, I think I would, a long, long time back, have said, understand that reading a novel and writing a novel aren't the same thing, and writing a textbook and writing a novel, they aren't the same thing. Learn to discriminate. Learn to make a distinction.
And do you find yourself being more brutal with your own awareness now once you've educated yourself? Do you look at your writing and see what people say? When the criticism, like in that early stages, did you see what they were trying to say and you wanted to improve, like obviously? So you obviously took that on board.
I'd love to say yes.
Yeah. Our egos get in the way.
I don't think that I didn't know how bad my grammar was. That was the first disturbing experience. Yeah. And when I realized how bad and how ignorant I was about English grammar that I thought I understood, then I began to think about how I was going to deal with the fact that, I had to get persons right and I had to get all sorts of elements of grammar right that I didn't know I had to get right.
Yeah.
Most of my writing was intuitive. I mean, I knew what an English sentence sounded like, and when it sounded wrong, I knew what was wrong with it, what to do to make it right, but I didn't actually understand the underlying grammar.
Yeah.
And so facing things like what person are you writing in, and you can't change from first person to second person to third person just because it feels like it's a good thing to do this chapter. It took me a while to really, I think I'm still coming to grips with that.
Yeah.
Your editor, who's doing a lovely job on my book at the moment, Steph is really helpful, and she's cleaned up my understanding of persons and tenses better than most of the formal learning I tried to do to understand it.
Yeah, well, sometimes having a personal support or personal coaching in the process directly on the project is always more strengthening as well, because you learn, more clearly. You can see the results of the benefit of that. So yeah, I'm glad you enjoyed it. I'm glad Steph helped you. She's very good. She's one of our best. So tell us about writer's block. Now, writing 5 books, 5 years, learning your craft. Did you experience that frustration? Did you experience the blockage of thoughts and passages and process? And how did you deal with it when that happened?
Sometimes I didn't know how to take the next step. Yeah. And what I learned to do, I tried all sorts of things. All the things everyone suggests to you, I gave them a bash.
Yep.
And finally, I realized that in the end, what I had to do was just stop writing and let it alone till I was clear what I wanted to do next.
Yep.
So sometimes I sat down and wrote pages of rubbish and threw it out. And sometimes I would just sit down and stare at the screen and pray.
There's something that happened?
For a non-religious person, that wasn't a very wise move. And then I went up to a coffee lounge. It's about 5 years ago. I went to a coffee lounge taking a scribble pad and pen with me. And I sat down in the corner with a cup of coffee, and I was in the middle of a period where I couldn't think what to write next. And I just sat down and wrote. And I found that if I hand wrote, I could actually write something meaningful, which I couldn't do if I did the same thing on the computer.
Yeah.
So once I'd got that, I just used to travel around with a scribbling pad and a pen wherever I went, and I'd sit down and write, and I could get through most of the nasty periods of writing with the help of a pen and paper, which I couldn't do when I sat down with a computer or an iPad.
Yeah, well, that's the perception mind of the brain, just sort of going a different process. It sort of gets a different perception. Like when you're sitting at a computer screen staring at it, it doesn't respond. A notepad's not as threatening or as easy to write with. So yeah, I understand that totally. That's really cool.
Also, I think my grandchildren find that unbelievable because as far as they're concerned, a keyboard is the basic thing in life. Whereas
what's a pen?
Exactly. For me, right.
So tell me about that with that in mind. Is your family supportive? Have they been supportive of this process and journey that you've been on for writing?
The only 2 members of my family who've read any of my work are my eldest son and a stepson.
Okay. How did they find it? What was the feedback? Did they enjoy it?
They thought they're both very positive.
Good.
And I'd thought about giving it to other people to read, and then I thought, no, really, no.
Yeah, save it for the masses. So tell us about with characters. When you developed characters, you said you wrote a case study style, but also the names of your characters are quite unique. How did you create the names and associate them to that characterization by name?
I had two ways of dealing with characters. One was to just dream up a name, and I did that once or twice, but some of them were so bad I had to throw them out. And then I used to go through a list on the computer from different nationalities and just scan through until I found a name that I actually liked.
So something felt like it was right for that person.
Yeah, about 50% of them came from that process, and about 50% of them came from making up a name which is non-linguistically based, but which sounded good to me at the time.
Yeah. So did you have a favourite character? Who was your favourite out of your characters?
The hero.
Well, why was Zed, that? Is that you?
Well, yeah, that's me. That's me. Zed's a psychologist on the spaceship.
Oh, good. There you go.
Yeah.
So he was the favourite to write as well.
Oh yeah, he was. I actually wrote a case study of him, and it's in there. At some point, it turns up because someone needs to read his file, and that's the case study where I actually managed to get it in, and it looks legitimate.
Well done. So, when you were younger, what did you want to do when you were younger? Like, what was your childhood dream as a goal?
I saw you ask that question of several other people who wrote books, and I listened to their answers, and I smiled to myself because I don't think I had one.
No, just went through life with. Yeah.
I had no idea what I was going to do when I grew up. If I ever grew up, I think probably part of the problem was I was never going to grow up. Just get older. Getting older, growing up, it seemed to be what was going to happen. I actually didn't have a plan apart from. As a little kid, I want to be on a fire engine, or I want to be flying a jet plane, but no.
Yeah, I think I was too busy trying to survive puberty to worry about trying to set goals for when I was older. So, what are your plans for future books now that the series is finished? What are you still writing? Are you still got things going? What are you doing now?
I decided I wouldn't start the next lot of stuff I want to write until we'd got published.
Yep.
I'm going to stay with what we're doing at the moment till the first couple of books have been published, and then when I'm sure it's smoothly running on its tracks, I'm going to start writing probably single books on social issues.
On
social issues. I'm one of those people who shouts at the news at night as I'm listening to the drivel that I'm getting fed, and the stupidity of the political system, and to the negativity of the economics financial system. I just have a lovely time shouting at the television.
Okay, well, there you go. Everybody watching, welcome to Phil's Soapbox. So that'll be the next series of books of Phil's rants. But at the moment, we're talking about Mind Travelers, which is a fantastic first book. Zed and Ophelia, did you say it was? Oleria. Sorry, everyone. Mind Travelers, Zed and Oleria is out in May. It's a great accomplishment for Phil. As you've heard, he's gone through the arduous task of learning writing as he goes and has come up with these 5 books in the series now. We're releasing the first one in May. Grab it anywhere in your local bookstores. They are sold and available in May everywhere books are sold. Ask your bookstores locally, support local business. That's what we ask everyone to do. You can also buy it online, of course, wherever you are. Thank you, Phil, for your time this evening. It's wonderful to talk to you and hear your story. I'm very excited about the release of your book. So the journey takes the next phase for you. So we're looking forward to that being successful. Thank you for your time tonight.
Terrific. Thank you very much. It's been interesting talking to you.
No worries. Well, we'll talk again. You've got more books coming, so we'll have another chat soon. Thank you, everybody. Now.